So the first one we're going to talk about is how to change a fraction to a decimal. It's the first one on your little half page. To change a fraction to a decimal, your numerator goes inside the box, your denominator goes outside the box, and you divide. Instead of writing it with a remainder, which is what we did with improper fractions and mixed numbers, you go back to writing it as decimal, okay? So in your notes, the example for this one is 3/4. So make sure you have that in there. And we're going to walk through all of these together. So numerator, your top number, goes inside the box. Denominator goes outside the box. And you need to divide. However, can 4 go into 3? No. So what am I automatically going to need to put right here?
Decimal.
A decimal and
Zero.
a 0. My suggestion to you is always start with a decimal and 2 zeros. That will usually get you far enough. Sometimes you might need to add more. Sometimes you'll only use 1. But if you get in the habit of writing decimal 2 zeros, you should be good to go. Okay? So from here, we just divide. Decimal goes straight up. 4 can't go into 3. So we need to know how many times 4 goes into 30. How many times does 4 go into 30? Anybody?
6. 8.
How many times does 4 go into 30?
7.
7. 7 times 4 is what? 28. Make sure you're doing this with me in your notes. What's 30 minus 28? 2. So I already added a second 0. Bring it down. How many times does 4 go into 20?
5 times.
That is 20, so I don't need to add any more zeros. I don't need to bring any more down. 3/4 as a decimal is 0.75. Okay? Get in the habit of writing the 0 in the front. So 0.75.
Well, that one's kind of easy, like you think like money.
That one is easy, thinking of money, but they get a little bit harder.
Yeah.
Okay? Questions on how to change a fraction to a decimal so far? All right, next one. Decimal to a percent. So if I give you a decimal, to change it to a percent, it's very easy. You move your decimal point 2 places to the right. That's it. Okay, it's always 2. Even if I give you a decimal that has 3 digits there, you still only move it 2 places. Okay, so the example that I have here, make sure you wrote it down. You take your decimal and you move it 1, 2 places to the right. But remember, the decimal at the end of a number turns that number to a whole number, so you don't need to write that in your percent. So 0.85 becomes 85%.
Oh, so that's it?
That's it. Questions on changing a decimal to a percent? Yeah.
So if you have 3 numbers, you still only move it to 2.
You
So
still
say you
only
had a
move it 2.
It'd be 85%.
It would be 85.2%. Okay? This one up here, we went from fraction to decimal. If I ask you to go to a fraction to a percent, you have to do both of these steps. You're going to go fraction to decimal first, and then go decimal to a percent. So 3/4, if you took a quiz and you got 3 out of 4 questions correct, you got a 75%. Okay? Hang on, Cody. The next one, decimal to a fraction. So if I give you a decimal and I ask you to go back to a fraction, this is how you do it. Make sure you have this example written down. Your number, whatever number that you have in the decimal part, so in this case 64, that number goes in your numerator. And your denominator is your place value. Okay, so if I were to read this decimal would say 64 hundredths. Okay, so we're going back to what we learned first quarter. So remember, 6 is in the tenths place, the 4 is in the hundredths place, so this is 64 hundredths. If you say hundredths, you're going to write 100 in the denominator. If it's 6/10, so if the 4 was gone, it was just 0.6, so 6/10, you would write 10 in the denominator. Okay? If you went all the way up to thousandths, so you had 3 numbers after the decimal, then it would be 1,000 in your denominator. One piece of note that I didn't put on here, and you need to write on here, you can write wherever you want, is you need to simplify. Okay? So this one here, 64 over 100, 64 hundredths. What can I divide 64 and 100 by? Just pick one. What? A 2. What else? What's something bigger? Nope, 10 wouldn't work. William? Nope, 8 wouldn't work. A what? A 4. So if we divide both these by 4, 2 would work, but you'll just have to do one more step. So divide both of those by 4. Again, make sure you're doing this with me. 64 divided by 4. Does anybody know what it is off the top of their head? Scott? 16. So 16's in our numerator. What's 100 divided by 4? Think money. Catalina? 25. So 64 hundredths as a decimal becomes 16 25ths as a fraction. Okay, is how to change a percent to a decimal. So if you can change a percent to a decimal, then you can also change a percent to a fraction, because I just told you how to change a decimal to a fraction. So you'd have to go percent to decimal, and then decimal to fraction. So do you see how sometimes you'll have to use 2 of these steps? So this one, 72%, make sure you have that written down. You put a decimal point at the end of your number. Okay, remember at the end of every whole number is an invisible decimal point. So you need to put it in. So 72 decimal point. Underline this if you need to, because a lot of you guys forget this. Decimal always goes at the end of a whole number. Then you take that decimal and you move it 2 places to the left. So to go from a decimal to a percent, you move it to the right. To go from a percent to a decimal, you move it to the left. So 72% of the decimal is 0.72. All right, here are some examples we're going to do together. I've set them up in boxes just because if I give you one, that means we can convert it into 2 other ones. So we're going to take the fraction, we're going to turn it into a decimal and then a percent. We're going to change our decimal to a percent and a fraction, and we're going to change our percent to a fraction and a decimal. Okay, so take a second to write down, let's just do the first one. So 3/8. So our first step is to change a fraction to a decimal. We can't go right and change a fraction to a percent without making it a decimal first. So our numerator goes inside the box. Our denominator goes outside the box. And again, always start with 0.00. Okay, decimal and then 2 zeros. That'll at least get you started. Again, make sure you're doing this with me. Decimal straight up. How many times does 8 go into 30 since it doesn't go into 3? Anybody? 3 times. 3 times 8?
24.
Subtract.
6.
Okay, so I already added another 0, so I'm going to bring that down. How many times does 8 go into 60?
7. 56.
Subtract.
4.
Okay, so I still have a remainder, so I'm going to add one more 0 here.
5.
How many times does 8 go into 40?
5.
5 times, evenly, so we can stop right there. So as a decimal, 3/8 is 0.375. So now we can easily convert this to a percent by moving our decimal 1, 2 places to the right, and we get 37.5%. Next one, go ahead and write down 0.75, and we'll go through both of these. Now this one here, we need to change it to a fraction and to a percent. Well, this one's kind of in the middle, so you're going to go either change it to a percent first, but then you're going to have to go back to the decimal to change it to a fraction. So doing one first isn't going to matter. So let's just change it to a fraction first. So we're going to take our number is 75, and then write our place value in the denominator. Well, we have tenths, hundredths, so we're going to write 100 in the denominator. Now we need to go through and simplify this. What can I divide 75 and 100 by? Anybody?
25.
25, good. So we're going to divide by 25.
50.
Divide by 25. 75 divided by 25.
3.
100 divided by 25.
4.
So 3/4 is the fractional value. We kind of went the opposite way in our notes on the previous page.
Yeah.
And then to change this to a percent, we take our decimal and we move it 2 places to the right. So we're going to go 1, 2. You can get rid of that 0 in the front. 0.75 becomes 75%. And then the last one, we have 30%, so I want to change that to a fraction and to a decimal. Well, we don't have a fraction to, we don't have a percent to a fraction right away on your notes, so we need to go through and make it a decimal first. To make it a decimal, we put our decimal point at the end and we move it 2 places to the
Right.
Oh boy, 2 places to the left. So 1, 2, and our decimal becomes 0.30. Now when we have a decimal, can I get rid of any extra zeros at the end?
Yes.
So really, my decimal is 0.3, 3/10. So to write this as a fraction, the number goes in your numerator. Your denominator is your place value, which is tenths. So we're going to put 10 in the denominator. Can you simplify 3/10?
No.
So that's your answer. Let's go ahead and work on these, see what you come up with. Here are the